Hi, I'm Amy, and this is A-Star Reads, and today I'm going to give you my February wrap-up, which I'm really excited about because I read a lot of books, and I had a lot of really great reads. I liked the books that I read in February, so I don't know if that was because it was my birthday month, and I was like, yeah, birthday, or if they were actually really good books. You'll have to let me know in the comment section down below once you've heard about them, whether you're like, oh, Amy, no, you just had a good month. It wasn't actually good reads. We'll see. So first I want to tell you my statistics, and then I will go into the actual books. In February, I read 13 books, and that ended up being 3,422 pages, which is about 300 more than I did in January, so I consider that a bit of a win. I was productive in February. Here's the coolest part though. My average rating was 4.27. The last couple of months it was like 3.7 something, so 4.27 is really high for me. And I don't know, all the books were good. Well, almost all the books were good. So I read 2 middle grade books, 3 YA, what I would consider YA, 7 adult books, and only 1 nonfiction. I think that was the only part of February that I didn't quite read enough in, was nonfiction. I didn't do enough of nonfiction. I had 0 books in the 1-star range, 1 book in the 2-star range, sadly, but it happened. 2 books in the 3-star range, 7 books that were in the 4-star range, and 3 5-star books, which I think is a lot for 1 month for me. I don't give 5 stars that freely, maybe more freely than some people, but I feel like it was like a good reading month. Okay, so the way that I want to talk about these books is I'm going to go in order of my least favorite all the way through to those 5-star books. The first book I want to talk about is Sword of Sorcery, Volume 1, Amethyst, and this was written by Christy Marx, and the illustrations were by Lopresti. This was a YA comic bind-up. So this was a set of comics. It worked for my Buzzwordathon because it was a color in the title, which Amethyst is a color. And then it also was one of my birthday spins from my TBR game. It was supposed to be middle grade book with the word amethyst in it because amethyst is my birthstone. And it wasn't a middle grade, but I felt like it would work for middle grade. And the main character's name was Amy. I couldn't pass it by. I couldn't pass this choice by. So I gave this book 2.75. I'm starting to wonder if I'm just not someone who loves comics and graphic novels because I don't rate them very highly. It wasn't great. It wasn't my favorite. One of the biggest problems with this though is that it's not complete, and I don't think any more of this series is going to come out. So you read these like 8 comics within this bind-up, and that is it. And there is no conclusion. And so that's a little frustrating. So it's hard to recommend this book. I don't think I could because you're not going to get any completion. This is a continuation of the Gemworld series. There was a series of comics that were set in Gemworld and that ended. And I think people wanted a little more from that. They started this one, Sword of Sorcery, and it didn't go so well. So they just canceled it. For me, as far as reading it goes, I had some problems with how disjointed it was. There was this really weird section where the story is going along and then all of a sudden she jumps to Earth and there's a completely different story with characters that don't get properly introduced. And it's like this random intermission almost where you're adding a completely different story in, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand where these people were coming from, and maybe if I had read the Gemworld series, I would understand it, but I never read it, so it was like, what the heck is going on? And it was so abrupt. And then they moved back into the regular story, and you're like, okay, well, now we're back. That whole section could have been left out. The other issues that I had were that it was kind of cheesy. No, it was really cheesy. The writing was very, very cheesy, and it just didn't work for me. And that's why I think it would be okay for middle grade, because there wasn't anything too heavy in this story, and this girl is young and she's very immature, so it works for a younger audience. The art style was beautiful. I really liked the art style, and I didn't tell you what it's about. It's about this young 17-year-old named Amy. Her and her mom have been moving from place to place, and they're very private. She doesn't know why they've been on the run, but the reason they have been is because they're kind of hiding out. Because once Amy turns 17, they have to go back to Gemworld, and Amy gets to take her place as Princess Amethyst. And the people who rule the Amethyst land, I can't remember what it's called, are sort of the rulers of all of Gemworld. So it's important that she survives to 17 to get back to this Gemworld because there are people who don't want her to. And so I didn't like how it started out. I really did not like that section where it diverged so completely from the main storyline. But once we came back, there were elements to it that I started enjoying more and more, and I liked some of the other characters that she was creating relationships with. So there were things to it that were okay, which is why I gave it a 2.75 versus anything lower. The next book I want to talk about is Smile by Raina Telgemeier, and this was also a graphic novel, a middle grade graphic novel that I chose for my birthday TBR spins. It was a middle grade set in the Bay Area, or San Jose, which is where I was born. This one was actually set in San Francisco, which is part of the greater Bay Area. And it was good. I gave it a 3.5. It was fun. It's another situation where I'm just not sure if I'm into graphic novels. And so this was based off Raina, the author's life. When she was in 6th grade, she had this horribly traumatic experience where she fell and she broke her 2 front teeth. She had to have oral surgery. She ended up having a lot of difficulties with that. And so then she ended up having to have braces for a long time and headgear and all these things to try to correct the problem, as well as she needed braces anyways. So it was like this huge element of mouth trauma that was happening during a period of her life where she was going through the development that people go through when they're in 6th grade and middle school, because this goes through her high school years. It was cute. There were elements to it I really enjoyed. You know, there was questions about friendships and the struggles you have when you're in those years of your life. There were, you know, boys and having crushes on those. One of my favorite parts was the event of the 1989 earthquake, because I was actually in that earthquake. I remember it. I was young. There was elements of nostalgia that I did enjoy about this. One of the things I do struggle with, and I'm finding that to be true with most graphic novels that I have read so far, is that they feel so disjointed. Like you'll have one little story scene and then you have another one and then you have another one, and they don't flow very well, and I don't feel like I get as much information as I would like. And it could just be that graphic novels aren't for me. I feel like I've read a few, and there was only one that I gave a 4-star to, and that was 7 Generations by David Alexander Robertson, which I liked. It was really good. Beautiful. I thought the artwork was beautiful. The story was very sad and difficult. It was a difficult storyline. But all the other graphic novels I've read, I've just kind of thought, they're okay, but I could take or leave them. And so I'm curious, do I just not like graphic novels? Or have I just not picked up the right ones? If you have suggestions for ones that you love, let me know in the comment section down below. I need to test this. I need to see if I'm just not a graphic novel person, and then be done with it and say, you know, that's okay. I don't love graphic novels, and accept that. The next book I want to talk about is Pride by Ibi Zoboi. And I read this because it was the February pick for the Down Memory Jane read-along. This was a YA retelling of Pride and Prejudice, because we're reading all of Jane Austen's novels as well as some retellings. And so I gave this one 3.75. I really did end up enjoying it, but there were issues. There were definitely issues with it. This is about a young girl named Zuri, who is Elizabeth Bennet in the whole Pride and Prejudice story. She is a girl that lives in Brooklyn, a very specific community of Brooklyn. She's very proud of her Afro-Latino roots. She has very strong opinions about the things that are happening within her community. And of course she should, because gentrification is happening. And there are people coming in who are buying out the properties, including the Darcy family, which is this really rich Black family that moves in across the street from the apartments that she lives in with her family. But she instantly dislikes the Darcy family, specifically the Darcy boys, because there's 2 of them. There's Darius and there's his older brother. She doesn't like them, for one, because they're coming in and changing things. Not only is gentrification happening, but the older brother is really into her sister, her older sister, and her older sister is also like, ooh, I like him. She had planned on spending the whole summer with her sister alone, and now all of a sudden she's having to compete. And she doesn't like that. Plus, she feels that these boys are super snobby, especially Darius, the younger brother, her love interest. Well, who could be her love interest. The guy who represents Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. So this was really cute, and I enjoyed the romance. I really liked Darius. His character was fun. Zuri was difficult. She was difficult to get into for me because she was so young. She is supposed to be 17, but she feels to me like she's actually 12 or 13. It's a very big age discrepancy for me, especially because Elizabeth Bennet feels really mature for her age, and so Zuri feels the opposite. She feels very, very young, and it took me a while to get into it. There was so much angst and anger in this story, which you expect from a young adult, but there was a lot in this one, and I was like, oh, it's just a little too young adulty for me. I understand that Ibi Zoboi was trying really hard to use the concepts behind the story to look at gentrification. And I thought that that was a great approach. However, I felt like she could have dived into it a little more. I felt like this book was not developed as much as it could have been. And so there were so many great ideas, and it was a fun retelling of Pride and Prejudice. But I ended up enjoying it a lot more just for the romance aspect of it than I did for the messages that it was trying to convey. They were important messages, and they were there, but I felt like they could have been built on even more. Okay, so the next one I want to briefly mention is Last Ones Left Alive by Sarah Davis-Goff. I read this for Polarathon. I also read it because the publisher sent it to me for a review, and I did a whole review video on this, so I'm not going to give you too much detail on it, but I will link the video in the cards and down in the description box below. I gave this a 4 stars. I ended up enjoying this a lot more than I expected to, just because when you start reading it, the writing style is a little different. So it took me a couple chapters to get into it, but once I did, I really enjoyed it. And this is an adult horror sci-fi dystopia novel, basically about zombies. They called them Skrakes. It's about this girl trying to survive among all these Skrakes in post-apocalyptic Ireland. This was a really interesting book, so check out my review if you're curious to know more about it. All right, so the next one I want to talk about was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I buddy read this one with Liz from For Booking Out Loud, which was the perfect way to read this. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It was a book that I will probably have to reread at some point because there's so much going on in this. So this was an adult classic, a literary fiction, and Marquez's writing style is very unique because I felt like it was almost rapid fire in a sense that he gave you so much information, but it was all very circular. The way he wrote things was very circular. In fact, the whole story is a very circular story. But I felt like when I was reading it, it was like, I was like, whoo, 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 and things were coming at me so fast, and there was so much information that you really had to focus and pay attention, which is why I think buddy reading it was so effective, because Liz and I could really talk about elements of this that we were struggling with. Luckily, there is a family tree in here, but all the family members are named basically the same thing, so it's really easy to mix up who you're reading about. So because all the names were so similar, it was very helpful for Liz and I to go through this and kind of, I guess, keep each other on track, because we had to come together and be like, okay, what exactly happened in this section? You know, who are we talking about? What's going on? What's the underlying theme? What point is he trying to get across? In the end, we had some profound realizations. It was fantastic. Liz and I were joking because we're like, we figured it all out. We know everything now. We don't have to read any books ever again. Because it was so profound, the conversation we were having. It was wonderful. So the writing style, like I said, it's very rapid and very circular, but it also was so beautiful. I just love some of the concepts and the quotes that Marquez uses. The way he describes these characters, incredible. You don't necessarily always like them, but they're interesting. They're some of the most interesting characters that you could ever possibly come across. You're just gonna like, what are these people? Who are they? I didn't tell you what it's about. This is about the Buendia family, and it is a generational book. It's the 100 Years of Solitude because we're looking at 6 generations within the Buendia family and how their lives surround this concept of solitude. They all live within the family. In fact, most of them don't actually leave the house the family house, and yet they still seem to all be cursed into this life of solitude. And he does a beautiful job of bringing this story all the way around so that you completely understand what's going on at the very ending. In fact, I thought that the ending of this, the very last part of this book, was one of the best endings I have read in a book. I was just like, the last few sentences of this book, and my mind's like, ooh, that was so good. It made up for the fact that I felt like the last couple of chapters were sort of filler chapters. Like, there were sections of this that I enjoyed more than others. The first section I loved. The second section was a little too military heavy. For the last few chapters, I was kind of like, you're introducing characters that don't really matter all that much to me because I've already invested in all these other characters, and just felt like, where's this? How is this going to tie up? How is this going to end? What is the significance of these last parts that you're adding to this? And then the very end is one of the most satisfying endings. Just so freaking good. And Liz and I both felt that way. So I had a great time buddy reading this. If you like literary fiction and you like books that will make you think, This is a fantastic book. The next one is another classic, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I gave this 4.25 stars. I realized as I was reading this that I've read it before. I think I read it in high school. I didn't read it for school, but I read it because I went through this weird classics kick when I was in high school. I'm a big fan of John Steinbeck. I still haven't read enough of his books to say that I'm a fan of all his works, but Cannery Row is still one of my all-time favorite classics. And so I was excited to read this. I picked it up because my nephew Nathaniel was reading it for school and we buddy read it together. So we will have a review video coming up in the next week or so where Nathaniel's going to give a review of this and talk about our discussion on it. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to edit that video. God, that kid goes on tangents. And this is about George and Lenny. They're both kind of like drifters who are going from one job to the next on these different farms. They're very poor, but they're hoping to eventually own their own piece of property. And George is the very intelligent one, but he's small and not very muscular. Lenny is the big, strong, beefy one, but he seems to have an intellectual disability. So George is always looking out for Lenny and taking care of him. So they end up working on this one farm and something happens. And this book is pretty short, but the themes of this are looking at ethics and morality, but then also friendship and how important friendship is for someone like Lenny and George and what that means in the context of the situation that they end up in. So a very good one, and one that usually gets talked about quite a bit in high school. So if you haven't read it, I will be posting a review for this soon and you can check out more. And you know, it's such a short book that if you're curious, just pick it up. All right, so the next one is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. And I read this one for the Polarathon. So I will link the vlog down in the description box below if you're curious to see more about what I thought about it while I was reading it. And this one I gave 4.5 stars. It was really good. It's a YA fantasy. And it's about this young girl named Vasya. And her mother gives birth to her because she wants her to have these powers that should be inherited within the family. And we don't really know too much about that and why that is, but we do know that Vasya has this ability to see spirits and see these sprites and see these little like house helpers that are in the community. They help like with the horses, or they help like they live inside the hearth and keep the fire going. Everything is going smoothly until Vasya's father brings home a new wife. He gets remarried and he brings home this wife, and she brings religious fanaticism to the community. And because of that, these little spirits, which were fine before, are seen as demons. People are not believing in them anymore. If they are believing in them, they're shutting them out. It becomes a problem. It becomes a problem because these little spirits are really important to basically keeping a balance. And so Vasya becomes the go-between in a sense. She has to protect the community against the harm that is being caused by the banishment of these different spirits. So the reason I gave this one a 4.5 stars as opposed to a 5 is because although it really gets incredible towards the end, I felt like it started a little slowly for me, and it took me a little time to get into it. The Russian folklore was fantastic, and I did enjoy hearing that, but some of the day-to-day stuff in the beginning wasn't as interesting to me as once you get into the real meat of the story. And then towards the end, like the action in this book is fantastic, which makes me really excited to read the next ones, because the end of this was so exciting that I'm just like, yeah, I gotta get to the next one. And you know how good I am at getting to the next one in the series. I'm not good at all. I'm just terrible. But I liked the characters. Some of the characters I loved, including the really bad ones, like the priest. If they're compelling and they're very interesting to me, I find them very intriguing. So if you're interested in learning more about The Bear and the Nightingale, you can check out my vlog in the description box below, or pick up this book because it was really good and most people on BookTube absolutely love it. My next 4.5 star book was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which I absolutely loved. You can check out my February nonfiction video, which I will link up there and down the description box below if you want to know more about this. I already absolutely love Trevor Noah, but learning more about his life was very interesting. And the conversation he had around the apartheid in South Africa was fantastic. So if you like nonfiction and you're curious about Trevor Noah's life, this is a great introduction. Although I really enjoyed reading the book, and I did read the book, I would recommend picking up the audiobook because it's narrated by Trevor Noah, and I think that would be fantastic. The only reason I gave it a 4.5 stars versus a 5-star was because I felt like I wanted a lot more from this. I just needed more. It's a small book, and some of the stories needed to be fleshed out a bit. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I actually listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Michael C. Hall. And I mean, that guy, he did a great job. So this book is about the Creed family, and they're moving to Ludlow, Maine because Louis Creed, the father, actually gets a position as a physician at the nearest university. And so this is kind of like a slow down job where they're gonna have more time to spend with the family. And they've got this wonderful house on this huge property across the street from this older couple called the Crandalls. And the only issue with this property is that there are these giant trucks that go up and down the street between the houses at like 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. These giant Orinco trucks. They're huge, they're dangerous, they kill a lot of people's pets that wander across the street. On the Creed property, they actually have this pet cemetery, which is kept up by the kids in the neighborhood whose pets get killed on this main road. And the kids have been for years burying their pets in the cemetery. The problem is, this is no ordinary cemetery, and so things start happening once the Creed family moves in. I just loved this. I don't think it was just because of how well I liked the narration from Michael C. Hall. I think I really just loved this story by Stephen King, and in fact, it's now one of my favorite Stephen King novels, and I actually liked it better than The Shining, but don't tell anybody because everybody loves The Shining so much. I love the character development, which is one of Stephen King's strengths. And what really got me about this book in particular were the scenes. They were so emotional, they were so impactful that I couldn't help it. I had tears in my eyes because they were so powerful and frightening. And there were so many elements to it that just made these scenes so fantastic. Those scenes alone were 5-star scenes. And the ending, although it was good, wasn't quite as good as those earlier scenes. So that's probably why I had to lower my rating a bit. There were moments where I felt like the pacing could have been a little bit off because King likes to go off on these digressions. He likes to digress quite a bit. Ultimately, I really liked the story. I really liked the Creeds, the Crandalls. I liked the people within this story. The next book was a very small 35-page story, Words Like Coins by Robin Hobb. I gave this one 4.75 stars. So close to perfection. Not quite a 5-star, but it was really, really close. And this is actually part of the Realm of the Elderling series. It doesn't have any really specific position, I think, that it needs to be read in within the whole realm. So this is just a really short story about Pixies and misconceptions, and this is all happening during this drought in the Six Duchies. I think this is in Tilth, one of the inland kingdoms, and their farming community, and there's this woman and her sister-in-law. They're kind of stuck all alone together because their husbands have gone off trying to find work, and one of them is pregnant, and they're struggling because of this drought. So I don't want to give much away, but the characters are fantastic in this. The story is beautifully done, and there's a great message here, and I highly recommend it. It's hard to get a hold of. I found it in a fantasy medley, which is this bind-up of short stories, but I know that other people are having difficulty finding it. And so I'm really sorry if I'm recommending this and it's hard to get a hold of because I wish it was more readily available. I will say that it is not necessary, at least I don't think it is necessary, to read this short story to be able to enjoy the whole Realm of the Elderlings. It's just kind of like a little added bonus. All right, let's get into the 5 stars. I'm so excited. Okay, so the first one was The Painted Drum by Louise Erdrich, and this was an adult historical fiction. I loved this book. I don't know how to explain why I loved it so much, but I did talk about this in a review that I did. So if you're curious to learn all about this book and how I felt about it, check out my review, which I will link in the cards and the description box down below. This is about an Ojibwe painted drum, and basically the history of this drum from the point it was created all the way up to the current time, and how this drum has affected lives and how, well, the lives have affected the drum as well, because painted drums are considered living drums. And I just thought this was a beautiful book. I thought that Louise Erdrich's use of Ojibwe storytelling was fantastic. She incorporated it beautifully. And I highly recommend it if you're looking to read more books by Indigenous authors, because Louise Erdrich is a very prolific author and she's so well known. So please check out her books. I really enjoyed this one. The next one I want to talk about is one I'm really very, very excited about. It's The Witches by Roald Dahl. I have loved this show growing up. I really loved The Witches, and I had never read the book. I've actually never read anything by Roald Dahl. And this one was easily a 5-star book. It's a middle grade, I guess fantasy technically. It's about this young boy and his grandmother, and they come up against the Grand High Witch and all the witches of England in this situation where the Grand High Witch has come up with this scheme to eradicate all children from England. This boy and his grandmother get caught up in this whole situation. And so it's a pretty simple story, but the writing is hilarious. And I feel like the whole time Roald Dahl was writing this, he was giggling to himself and laughing, because the way it's written, the way it reads, is just so fun. You could tell that he was enjoying himself the whole way through writing this. I loved all his descriptions. I like the way he expressed things like in little songs or rhymes. And I know that some people complain that for middle grade it's pretty scary, and I can see that yes, this would be a pretty scary story for little kids, but for the right group, I think that they could handle it quite well. So just when you read this, or if you have your child read this, just be aware that it could be taken the wrong way and could be very scary for children. I know that the original movie was pretty darn scary. Especially, well, I didn't think it was scary as a kid. Well, I mean, it was scary, but I enjoyed it. I didn't have a problem with it. But if you have a child who might take it too seriously, just beware that for a middle grade, this was considered a very scary one. And the final book, my last 5-star book, which probably will come as no surprise, is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I loved this one. I read it for Polarthon, and it also worked for my Buzzwordathon challenge because it has cerulean, which is a color in it. This is an adult fantasy, although that is debatable. I've heard people say that middle grade, YA, all those ages could read this, and so I feel like it's kind of a timeless book. I don't really think you need to put an age label to it. There is a romance in this, but it's not a heavy romance. The writing style is very simple, so it's not too complex that a younger audience couldn't enjoy this. This is about a man named Linus Baker, and he works for the department in charge of magical youth. Because he's so good at his job and he's very diligent, the extreme upper management puts him on this assignment on this little island called Marquez Island, and it's this like top secret place where the most dangerous magical children are placed. And they're placed in the care of Arthur Parnassus, who is the caretaker of, not the island, but he's the caretaker of the children on the island. Linus has to go to this island and basically report on how things are going within this orphanage and whether or not everything is safe there. And if it's not, then should they close Marquez Island orphanage down? But once he gets on Marquez Island and he starts learning about these children, and he starts understanding them and understanding Arthur more, things begin to change. And there's a wonderful, sweet romance between him and Arthur Parnassus. It's lovely. It's a perfect book to read if you need something that will make your heart happy. Like, it really, really did. And yet it talks about really difficult subjects. It talks about discrimination. It talks about racism. It talks about prejudice in a way that's easy to digest, I think, for anybody of any age. And I thought that the conversation was so subtle, but so profound. And honestly, this book meant a lot to me because I'm in the process of trying to become a teacher. And this book gave me all the feelings that I feel about why I want to be a teacher. In fact, it made me very choked up because I felt like the reasons why I want to be a teacher so badly were really represented well in this book. So I think this is a book that a lot of teachers will enjoy. It was so relaxing and lovely and beautiful, and the characters are easily some of the most charming characters I've read in books. And so it's really hard to say anything negative about this book, except some people might feel like it's too young or too simplistic. And it may be those things, but I didn't care. I loved it. Check it out. And if you have read any of these books, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought. And if you would give them different ratings for me, because we all have different opinions. And maybe I just had a really good February. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe now if you'd like to see what my reading adventure is like in March, because it's not going quite as well as February. I'm not as far along as I would like to be. Oh well. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.